Have you ever wondered why when you start to change, really change, everything around you starts to change too? People, glances, conversations, everything shifts, but not always for the better. Where you expected support, you find discomfort. Where you sought encouragement, you receive disapproval. They hide it behind jokes, advice disguised as concern, or that uncomfortable silence that arises when you speak about something deeper. But there's a very simple reason for this. Your evolution challenges their comfort, and no one likes being forced to truly face themselves. Maybe you're going through this right now. You started thinking differently, acting differently, questioning things you used to accept without hesitation, and suddenly you find yourself alone, misunderstood, judged. What no one ever told you, but what Nietzsche understood like few others, is this. This discomfort is the price of building a strong mind. Not just any kind of strength, but a raw, silent, real kind of power. A strength that intimidates. Because without even trying, your presence reveals the inertia in the lives of those still living on autopilot. And why does this happen? Because a truly powerful mind is a threat to collective mediocrity. And as Nietzsche warned, the moment you begin to think for yourself, to create your own values, to abandon the comfortable illusion of ready-made truths, you become dangerous. Dangerous to the system, dangerous to others, and above all, dangerous to the person you used to be. Have you ever wondered why, when you start to change, truly change, everything around you starts to shift too? People, glances, conversations, everything transforms. But not always for the better. Where you expected support, you find discomfort. Where you sought encouragement, you receive disapproval. They hide it behind jokes, behind advice disguised as concern, or in that uncomfortable silence that arises when you speak about something deeper. But there's a very simple reason for this. Your evolution challenges their comfort. And no one likes being forced to truly face themselves. Maybe you're going through this right now. You've started thinking differently, acting differently, questioning things you once accepted without hesitation. And suddenly, you find yourself alone, misunderstood, judged. What no one ever told you, but what Nietzsche understood like few others, is this. This discomfort is the price of building a strong mind. Not just any kind of strength, but a raw, silent, real kind of power. A power that intimidates. Because without even trying, your presence reveals the inertia in the lives of those still living on autopilot. And why does this happen? Because a truly powerful mind is a threat to collective mediocrity. And as Nietzsche warned, the moment you begin to think for yourself, to create your own values, to abandon the comfortable illusion of ready-made truths, you become dangerous. Dangerous to the system, dangerous to others, and above all, dangerous to the person you used to be. Change is rarely just about you. The moment you begin to shift, internally, silently, the entire ecosystem around you reacts like a body rejecting a foreign organ. Not because you've become hostile or arrogant, but because your growth silently confronts what others have avoided facing within themselves. They don't say it directly, of course. Instead, they deploy the subtle weapons of social control. The casual remark, "You've been acting strange lately." The awkward joke at your expense when you decline another evening of mindless consumption. The unsolicited advice wrapped in false concern. "I'm just worried you're taking this whole self-improvement thing too seriously." These are not accidents. They are the immune responses of a system threatened by your awakening. You'll notice it first in the small moments. When you stop laughing at jokes that mock what you now hold sacred. When you no longer participate in the ritual complaints about work, weather, and the general unfairness of existence. When you choose solitude over superficial socializing, and they ask with barely concealed alarm, "Are you okay? You seem distant." You no longer fit into the version of you that others were comfortable with. You've become a mirror, reflecting back their own stagnation, their own compromises, their own quiet desperation. And mirrors, as we know, can be merciless. But this isn't a problem. It's the cost. Because every meaningful transformation demands a shedding, not just of old beliefs or habits, but of the roles you were assigned and other people's narratives. When you grow, you disturb the choreography. When you wake up, you interrupt the sleepwalk. You become living proof that change is possible, which makes their inertia suddenly visible, suddenly chosen, suddenly inexcusable. The mirror you've become doesn't judge them deliberately. It simply reflects what is, the gap between who they could be and who they've settled for being. This reflection terrifies those who are still clinging to certainty, conformity, and convenience, because to acknowledge your growth would mean admitting their own stagnation. To celebrate your courage would mean confronting their own cowardice. You'll lose people, not because they stopped loving you, but because they no longer access you at the level they once did. You've outgrown the room they're still trying to breathe in. The air has changed. The conversations that once sustained you now feel hollow. The activities that once bonded you now feel like elaborate distractions from what matters most. This is what no one tells you about healing, evolving, thinking for yourself. It creates distance. But don't mistake that distance for loneliness. It's a clearing, space being made for what's real, what's aligned, what's next. It's the natural consequence of refusing to shrink yourself to fit spaces that were never meant to contain your fullness. So when you start to feel the pull away from certain people, places, or patterns, pause. Don't run back just to feel accepted. Instead, ask yourself, is this discomfort rejection, or is it growth finally having space to breathe? Because in the end, evolution isn't polite. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't seek approval. It simply happens. And everything not built to hold your truth will start to crack. And that's not tragedy. Let it crack. Let it fall away. Let the mirror do its work. The world peddles peace like a drug, constantly urging you to seek balance, to chase harmony, to smooth over the rough edges of existence at all costs. But Nietzsche taught the opposite. It's not order that transforms you, it's the collapse. It's not calm that awakens you, it's the chaos you survive. Think about it. When has genuine growth ever emerged from comfort? When has profound insight ever been born from ease? The comfortable life is the sterile life, predictable, manageable, utterly forgettable. Growth happens when everything breaks, when the story you were living no longer fits, when the identity you clung to begins to fall apart, when the ground beneath you crumbles and there's nowhere left to stand but inside yourself. Consider the difference. The sterile peace of a life lived on autopilot, waking up, going through the motions, following the prescribed path, never questioning, never challenging, never truly feeling. This is the peace of the graveyard. It's the kind of tranquility that slowly suffocates the soul while promising safety, versus the productive fire of inner chaos, the burning away of illusions, the painful recognition of truth, the violent dissolution of who you thought you were. This fire doesn't comfort, it forges. And it's in that moment, in that raw, terrifying, unfiltered moment of complete uncertainty that something sacred begins to emerge. You. Not the version of you that followed the script, not the one shaped by expectations, by the desperate hunger for approval, but the one born in fire, the one that exists after the breakdown, the one that can only emerge when everything false has been burned away. That's why Nietzsche wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." He wasn't being poetic, he was being precise. The dancing star, this is not merely a beautiful metaphor. It is the integrated self, the Übermensch in embryo, It is what happens when you take the chaotic, conflicting elements of your own nature, your pain and your joy, your shadow and your light, your wounds and your wisdom, and forge them into something new. Something that moves with grace and power because it has learned to dance with uncertainty itself. This dancing star is you, after you've stopped running from your own depths. It's you after you've made peace with your contradictions. It's the version of yourself that no longer fears the dark because it has learned to generate its own light. It moves through the world with a sovereignty that is both terrible and beautiful. Terrible to those who still cling to the comfort of conformity, beautiful to those who recognize the courage it takes to become truly alive. Chaos is not the enemy. It is the crucible, the space where illusion burns and truth is forged. Most people run from that fire. They distract, numb, rationalize, escape. They medicate themselves with busyness, with entertainment, with the endless pursuit of external validation. But if you can stay, if you can breathe inside the storm instead of begging for it to end, you become something rare. Someone who can stand inside uncertainty without losing center. Someone who no longer fears pain because they've learned how to transmute it into power. This is the paradox. What feels like the end is actually the beginning. Not because the pain disappears, but because you stop resisting what it's trying to teach you. Pain becomes teacher. Chaos becomes ally. The breakdown becomes the breakthrough. Pain is not punishment. Chaos is not failure. They are teachers. Unforgiving, yes, but honest in ways that comfort never could be. And once you stop asking life to be easier and instead ask yourself to become stronger, you begin to discover a strength that no one gave you and no one can take away. At first glance, Nietzsche's most infamous phrase, "God is dead," sounds like rebellion, like the battle cry of an intellectual revolutionary. But it wasn't defiance. It was a diagnosis. He wasn't celebrating the loss of something sacred. He was warning us. The scaffolding we once used to explain the world no longer holds. God here doesn't necessarily mean religion in the traditional sense. It means certainty, authority, the external source of meaning that once provided answers to life's most terrifying questions. It means the comforting illusion that somewhere, somehow, there exists a cosmic plan, a divine purpose, a higher authority that justifies our suffering and guarantees our significance. And when that illusion collapses, when you realize that no one is watching, no one is keeping score, no one is coming to save you, so does the comfort of believing that meaning exists independently of your choices. The death of God is the death of excuses. It's the moment you realize there's no one left to blame, no cosmic plan to reference when life feels unfair, no predetermined script that explains why things happen as they do. This realization doesn't come gently. It arrives like a violent awakening, stripping away the comfortable narratives we use to make sense of existence. There's no one coming to rescue you, no higher script that justifies your suffering, no ultimate authority to tell you what your life should mean. And this terrifies most people, because freedom, true freedom, isn't the euphoric liberation we imagine. It's heavy, violent, total. It's the crushing weight of realizing that every choice is yours, every consequence is yours, every meaning you find or fail to find is yours to create or destroy. When faced with this violent freedom, the temptation to retreat becomes overwhelming. How much easier it would be to slip back into dogma, to embrace some new certainty, to find another authority to follow. The mind rebels against this responsibility, searching desperately for someone else to hand the burden to. Tell me what to believe, it pleads. Tell me what my life means. But the silence that answers is absolute. This is the weight Nietzsche placed on the individual, not to live by commandments handed down from above, but to create values from within the abyss of unknowing, not to seek salvation from external sources, but to accept that you are already the only one responsible for what your life becomes. You are the author, the editor, and the reader of your own existence. And yes, many collapse under this weight, because it's easier to submit than to stand, easier to follow than to carve, easier to believe someone else holds the answers than to sit with the unbearable truth. There might not be any answers until you create them. The psychological weight of total responsibility can crush those unprepared for its magnitude. But those who remain standing, even trembling, in that abyss of unknowing, begin to awaken something deeper than belief. They begin to feel the stirrings of a self that is sovereign, a self that no longer needs permission to exist, validation to act, or approval to become. This is not the false confidence of the ego, but the quiet power of someone who has learned to generate meaning from within. Because with the death of the external God comes the birth of something far more dangerous and far more divine. You. Not you as you were taught to be, but you as you choose to become. You as the creator of values, the generator of meaning, the architect of your own significance. This is not blasphemy. This is the most sacred responsibility imaginable, to become worthy of the freedom you've been given, even when, especially when, no one is watching. Before we dive into how to rebuild yourself from the ashes, take a moment. If you're still here, it means this message is speaking directly to something inside you. Comment below with the word awake so we know you've made it this far. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Because the next step is not survival, it's transformation. When Nietzsche introduced the idea of the Overman, or the Übermensch, he wasn't inventing a fantasy, he was proposing a solution, a new kind of human, one who doesn't inherit their identity like a family heirloom, but forges it in the fire of conscious choice. One who doesn't follow values like a sheep follows a shepherd, but creates them like an artist creates masterpieces. A being who has stepped beyond obedience, beyond guilt, beyond the desperate need to belong to something outside themselves. The Übermensch does not wait for the world to tell them what is right. They do not ask, is this acceptable? They ask, is this worthy of who I'm becoming? And that shift from external validation to internal authority changes everything. Consider the difference between inherited values and created ones. And inherited value might sound like success means climbing the corporate ladder, accumulating wealth, buying the house with the perfect lawn, because that's what successful people do. This is a value received, not chosen. It carries the weight of tradition, but lacks the power of personal conviction. Versus a created value, success means having complete sovereignty over my time, the freedom to pursue what ignites my soul, the ability to say no without explanation. This value has been forged in the crucible of self-knowledge. It doesn't care what others think because it emerges from what you know to be true about yourself. Creating values in practice means asking ruthless questions. When everyone around you prioritizes comfort, you ask, what would I choose if I weren't afraid? When society celebrates conformity, you ask, what expression of myself have I been suppressing? When the crowd chases external validation, you ask, what would I do if no one was watching and no one would ever applaud? Because most people live not from will, but from fear. They live to be liked, to fit in, to avoid rejection, criticism, abandonment. Their choices are made not by their highest self, but by their most frightened self. But the Übermensch lives to create, not just art, though that may be part of it, but meaning, morality, reality itself. This is not an easy path. It requires you to break the inner chains you didn't even know were there, the ones disguised as politeness, as humility, as reasonable compromise. You will have to kill the parts of you that still ask for permission to exist. You will have to stand in rooms where no one claps. You will have to hold your ground in the silence that follows when you say what's true instead of what's expected. And yes, it will hurt. You will lose relationships built on who you used to be. You will be called distant, arrogant, cold, difficult. But the truth is, they are reacting to your sovereignty, because there is nothing more threatening to the status quo than a person who no longer needs it. The Übermensch is dangerous, not because they wish to dominate others, but because they can no longer be dominated by them. They have found the source of power within themselves, and therefore they cannot be controlled by the promise of inclusion or the threat of exclusion. They have learned to generate their own approval, their own purpose, their own sense of worth. That is the beginning of becoming the Übermensch. When your internal compass becomes louder than external commands, when you no longer seek applause, but alignment, when you stop following the story and start writing it, when you realize that the most radical thing you can do in a world that profits from your insecurity is to become unshakably sure of who you are. But this power does not make you loud. It makes you clear. It makes you quietly dangerous, not through aggression, but through presence. Through the simple fact that you exist exactly as you choose to exist, regardless of who approves or disapproves. This clarity becomes a form of power that cannot be taken away because it was never given by anyone else. By the time you begin to embody your own truth, unapologetically, you will notice something strange. You don't need to attack anyone, criticize anyone, or even speak about your transformation. And yet they feel attacked. Not because you've harmed them, but because your clarity exposes their confusion. Your autonomy highlights their dependence. Your presence, sharp, grounded, unshakable, becomes a threat to everything they've convinced themselves is normal. This is the invisible war Nietzsche feared most, the quiet tyranny of the many against the one who dares to rise, not through violence, that would be too honest, but through shame, through sarcasm, through exclusion, through that subtle but unmistakable message. Tone it down. Make yourself smaller. You're making the rest of us uncomfortable. Here's where psychology validates philosophy. In 1951, Solomon Asch conducted a series of experiments that revealed the terrifying power of conformity. He placed individuals in rooms with actors who were instructed to give obviously wrong answers to simple questions about line lengths. The results were devastating. 75% of participants went along with the group's incorrect answer at least once, even when they could clearly see the truth with their own eyes. They chose the comfort of belonging over the discomfort of being right. This wasn't about intelligence, it was about the unbearable weight of standing alone. Asch's experiment reveals what Nietzsche understood intuitively. The herd doesn't hate you for being wrong, it resents you for standing out. The pressure to conform isn't logical, it's primal. It's the deep, unconscious fear that if someone breaks from the group might dissolve. And if the group dissolves, who are they? Because collective mediocrity doesn't hate you for being wrong. It resents you for standing out. It's not that the herd wants to be saved. It wants to stay the same and drag you back in so it doesn't have to change. And it will use every tool it has: belonging, tradition, guilt, nostalgia, the comfort of shared complaints, the ritual of collective victimhood. You'll notice how they operate. Social rituals become weapons of conformity. The mandatory group lunch, where deviation from the script is met with uncomfortable silence. The unspoken rules about what can and cannot be discussed. The subtle mockery directed at anyone who takes themselves too seriously. They'll gather to complain about work, about relationships, about the general unfairness of existence, and your absence from these rituals will be noted, questioned, pathologized. You will hear the familiar refrains. You've changed. You think you're better now? You've become cold, distant, difficult. Notice how these aren't observations. They're accusations. They're attempts to shame you back into the fold, to make your growth feel like betrayal rather than evolution. But here's the truth. Yes, you've changed, and you should never apologize for that, because change is not betrayal. Growth is not arrogance, and solitude is not failure. It's the natural consequence of becoming unbreakable. It's what happens when you stop betraying yourself out of fear of being alone. The stronger you become, the more your silence will speak louder than their words. Your standards will feel like rebellion to those who have lowered theirs. Your refusal to participate in smallness will feel like violence to those still addicted to it. Your comfort with solitude will highlight their desperate need for constant validation. But don't let that pull you back, because the world doesn't need more people trying to be liked. It needs people brave enough to be whole, to walk alone when necessary, to stand firm in the face of pressure, to carry the weight of truth, even when it costs connection, comfort, and the illusion of belonging. This is not the end of the journey. It's the battlefield where your transformation is tested, where you discover whether your new self can withstand the pressure to shrink back into the old one. You don't become unbreakable by being accepted. You become unbreakable by no longer needing to be. The war against collective mediocrity is won not by defeating others, but by refusing to defeat yourself, by choosing authenticity over acceptance, by choosing growth over comfort, by choosing the dancing star over the dying flame of conformity. This is the end of the video, but it's not the end of your path. What you heard here isn't a formula. It's not a quick fix. It's a confrontation, a mirror, a call. Because the truth is, becoming unbreakable isn't a title you earn. It's a choice you remake every day, in the way you speak, in what you accept, in what you walk away from, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. You don't need to prove your strength to anyone, but you do need to remember that clarity comes with cost, and power comes with solitude. The more you become yourself, the more you will disturb what's false. And that's not something to fear. That's something to honor. So take a breath, look at what's falling away, and instead of chasing what left, ask what's finally ready to rise. If you've made it this far, it's because you needed to hear this message. Something inside you is already shifting. Don't stop now. Take a moment to watch our latest video. Do this shadow work for 30 days. You won't recognize yourself, where we dive into Carl Jung's shadow theory and why everything you're looking for is hidden in the parts of yourself you've rejected. We explore how living behind the persona leads to exhaustion, how the shadow holds your repressed potential, and how true transformation begins when you stop running from yourself and start integrating what you've tried to hide. Because the path isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you really are. If you haven't subscribed yet, consider joining us so you don't miss what comes next. Until next time, take care of your mind, your soul, and your truth. You're not alone on this path. Not anymore.